Thanks everybody for joining us today. Those of you that are watching us now, and those of you that are hopefully going to be watching this later on, either online or being showed this by your teachers. It's a great pleasure to introduce Joe Seddon, who is the founder of Zero Gravity. Joe was at Oxford University studying PPE, and he graduated with a double honours. So he's been there and done that, and definitely got the t-shirt, and started Access Oxbridge prior to leaving university, and that has now morphed into Zero Gravity. So he will talk a bit about that, but really he's just talking about why you should go to university or start thinking about university. And really, Joe, it's over to you to explain more.
Sure. So thanks for the introduction, Naomi. So you'll see from the slide that the title of this talk is "It's Time to Start Thinking About University." And the reason that thinking is underlined is I think the way you should approach this is it's time to start asking some of the deep questions about university. You know, why you want to go, how it works, and what's the difference between getting where you want to get to and not doing that. Because especially in normal times and these times as well, there's so much noise around university. You know, which universities are better than others, which degree should I do, how does that contribute to my next stage of my life, what grades do I need? And I think this presentation is going to try and cut through some of that noise that you hear and try and concentrate on those things that really matters. And the way we're going to try and do that is by dispelling some of the key myths around the university sector. There's a lot of hearsay around in the sector, and I think it's time to sort of really address you know, what's true, what's false, and what you should be thinking about at this time in terms of making that decision about your next step. So before we go into that fully, I just want to give a bit of a sense of who I am and my background, so you can make a decision about whether to listen to what I say or not. So you might see from the photos that I'm fairly young myself. I'm currently 23, and I originally came from a small town in West Yorkshire, a small town called Morley, if any of you ever heard of it. Attended my local state school and did the journey from state school to Oxford University. So I know myself, from having gone through the process only 5 years ago, just how difficult and tricky it is, and especially in terms of accessing the right information at the right time and making those key decisions. I've been through it, I know what it's like. And when I finished university, I was really passionate about giving back to the next generation of students. So I set up a couple of organizations that really worked on helping really talented students from areas of the country where there aren't thousands of people getting to top universities. I try to sort of make a difference and sort of give back and help those students to get to where they want to be. So over the past couple of years, I've supported a couple of hundred students into top universities, over 100 into Oxford and Cambridge. So hopefully some of you, after listening to this talk today, might be interested in hearing more of what I've got to say, or more of people like me. And if you do listen to this talk and you are enthused or want to know what you can do next, a key website you might want to check out is Zero Gravity. So that's the organisation that I represent and where I'm from, and what we are is a digital mentoring platform, where you can connect directly with a young person like me to get more advice about your trip to university. So let's go straight into it then and sort of consider some of the key myths. But I think before we sort of start dispelling the myths wholesale, the first question is to ask, you know, why should you care about going to top university? So we sort of live in a society where it's almost drilled into us when we get to school that, you know, you must start thinking about university early, you must go to top university. But I think it's important to actually think why. So the key message I like to send at this point is, you know, reaching top university isn't easy, and anyone who says it is not telling the truth. And getting to a top university is very difficult. It relies on doing well at school, getting the right grades, and navigating what is quite a complex university admission system. But it's certainly not impossible. And actually, if you think about it the right way, you can get to where you want to be. But in order to do that, you need to be motivated. And I think the key thing in terms of motivation is to know why you want to go to a top university. And in terms of thinking about why, I think it's really important to think at this point, you know, where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years time? And what does that mean? What sort of person you want to be? And why is it that you really want to go to university? So here are just some of the key reasons why you might want to go to university. And you might think that one of these applies to you or multiple ones do. I think it's really important to understand. So some of you may really love your particular academic subject. So you study a subject at a GCSE or A level and you think, I absolutely love this subject. I want to know more about it. Or it might be the case that actually you don't really care that much about your subject. You're using university as a stepping stone to a particular career opportunity. Or even more than that, it might just be about money or status. You want to enter a career that will just see you well off and able to live a good standard of living, and you don't particularly care what it is. Or finally, it might be just about university experience, going to university to get an increased sense of what's out there in the world. And these are all good, rational reasons for wanting to go to university, but I think it's particularly important to think about why you want to go, because it might inform some of your choices, your choice in terms of which type of university you go to, in terms of what course that you want to study, and perhaps as well, maybe looking at some of those other opportunities as well. Of course, I'm going to talk today a lot about highly selective universities, but for those of you who are particularly interested in particular types of careers, you also might want to start thinking about and looking into apprenticeships as well, because the apprenticeship sector in the UK has really, really developed over the past couple of years. But let's go straight into some of those myths now. So the first one is all about choosing a course. So this is pretty fundamental, obviously, to going to university, but you'd be very surprised about how many young people I come across who don't think particularly deeply about the course that they want to study. And it's really important, not just in terms of making a successful application, but actually, staying at university as well. If you look online, there's lots of people who, get to university, realize that they don't like their course, and then decide that they want to drop out and go to another university to do another course. And no one wants to be in that situation, because it makes things incredibly difficult and stressful. So making sure that you've picked a course which is right for you and aligns with your why, I think is a really important thing to start thinking about right now. So I think the myth number one that I like to dispel is all around, you should pick a course to try and increase your chance of getting into university. So a lot of people, one of the standard things they do is they'll sort of choose a selection of different courses which their A-levels facilitate, and then they'll just look for the course where the least number of people apply, because they think that's university where I've got the highest chance of success. Well, actually, that's a really bad thing to do for two reasons. The first reason is that if you pick a course just because it's one where it's easy to get in, actually you might not enjoy that course, and actually the next 3 or 4 years of your life might not be particularly enjoyable. So it's always best to choose a course which you have a really strong attachment to in terms of your ongoing motivation, and making sure you can finish your degree and get a good grade is really important too in terms of your future job opportunities. But the second reason is that actually the number of people who apply to a course isn't always a good indicator of how competitive it is. And there's some courses where lots and lots of people apply, but actually a lot of those people don't have very good grades or don't study the right subjects, or a lot of them are international students who might not sort of understand how the system works. On the other hand, there are some courses where less people apply, but actually the quality of applicants is really, really, really high. So for example, to give you a contrast, engineering is one of the most popular courses in the UK. Thousands upon thousands of students apply to it every single year, whilst computer science, especially some of the highly selective universities, you don't get many students applying for. But actually, when you look at the sort of quality of candidates applied to those courses, actually the quality of computer science applicants is so high for many of those universities, actually they're really competitive despite a low number of applications. So don't always use the number of applications for a particular course, a particular university as a good proxy for competitiveness. You need to go a little bit deeper there to get behind the numbers. So myth two is that entrance requirements for a course are a good indicator of competitiveness. So when you go on the university website and you have a look at a course, it'll tell you what grades that you need to be able to access that course, or what grades you'll need to get in your final A-level examinations to be able to access that course. And some people again use this as an indicator of how competitive the course is. Now, of course, in a very broad sense, it is a good indicator, in the sense that a course where the requirement is 3 A's is obviously going to be more competitive than a course where the requirement is 3 C's. But again, you shouldn't push that too far. There's lots of courses out there which are 3 A's, for instance, which are far more competitive than courses with 2 A stars and an A. Actually, the way that university admissions officers set those requirements is usually more to do with making sure the students who arrive at the university have the right prior knowledge and understanding to be able to perform the course, rather than a way to sort of find in order to sort of filter out certain people. So again, don't read too much into the grade requirements of the course. Of course, you want to apply to a course where you feel you can meet the grades required, but don't use it again as a single indicator of the best courses to apply to. The system works a little bit more complex than that. And the third one that I've come across quite a lot is about vocational courses and future job opportunities. Certainly, I've seen lots of people say previously that I want to study a course like medicine, for instance, because it leads naturally into a job, and that's going to be best for my future job opportunities. And of course, in some instances, that is true. But again, when you actually look at the data, you see that there's lots of non-vocational courses out there with really good job opportunities. In particular, because they're non-vocational, their job opportunities tend to be really broad. So again, if you care about job opportunities, don't think that you have to apply for a vocational course which might naturally segue into a particular career. I think especially in the world that we're living in, where it's changing so quickly, different industries are being really radically disrupted. It's really more important than ever before to have a really broad skill set. So actually, there may be advantages to non-vocational courses versus vocational courses, or certainly more advantages than there were 5 or so years ago. So again, don't rule out a course just because it's non-vocational. It doesn't naturally lead to a certain career. Again, this is one which really pertains to the highly selective universities, so Oxbridge, the Russell Group, and some others. There's a little bit of a myth floating around that you shouldn't apply to those universities unless you study exclusively facilitating subjects. So what that means is, universities usually give a list of the subjects they see as the top ones which students should be studying in order to access university. So it tends to be, maths, English, the free sciences, those sort of academic A levels. But what I'm trying to say here is, if you don't study those sort of subjects, don't be put off in terms of applying to a top university. If you go to any university website and their admissions requirements at the bottom of the page, it will tell you what the courses A levels are that you should do in order to access those courses. And of course, having some more A levels above and beyond that in facilitating subjects is great. But if you do study non-facilitating subjects, don't be put off in terms of applying to that course. There's plenty of students who get offers from top universities who study one or more non-facilitating subjects. So again, in terms of both applying to university and making choices around what you should study, don't be put off non-facilitating subjects if those are subjects which you're really passionate about. They can be also a great entry route into top universities as well. Not everyone has to study maths and the free sciences. And the final one is about meeting the course requirements. So again, just like I said before, that you shouldn't make a decision based on the grade requirement of a university. You shouldn't also assume that just because you think you can meet the requirement that you'll definitely receive an offer. So there's lots of circumstances, and this happens to thousands of students every single year, where they've been predicted 3 A stars and they apply for a university where it's A star and 2 A's and they get rejected. So don't always think that just because the course requirements are in a certain way, you'll definitely get an offer. Now, there's more components to a university application than just your predicted grades. Obviously, there's your academic performance at GCSE, but also the personal statement as well, which is really important for the university. So that's just a roundabout way of saying that grades are important, but they're not everything. There's certainly more to a university application than just that. So that's a little bit about choosing a particular course. But now I want to talk a little bit more about choosing a university. So once you decide on what course you want to study, then the decision becomes around where do you want to study it. And there's hundreds of universities spread all across the country. And sometimes it can be really difficult to make a decision, especially because it's impossible to go and visit every single university or know every single thing possible about each one. So a lot of the time, students in the past have made decisions about which university to go to based on a couple of simple indicators or things that they've looked at. So in terms of making a good decision, it's important that you're looking at the right things rather than the wrong things. So again, I'll just run through a couple of myths here, which might point you in the right direction in terms of where to look and where not to look. So the first thing is the myth about Russell Group universities always being better than the non-Russell Group university. So you may be familiar with this piece of jargon, but there's 30 odd universities in the UK who are called the Russell Group universities. So those are universities like Oxford, Cambridge, Warwick, Leeds, Manchester. And then there's non-Russell Group universities in the country as well, outside that 30. And sometimes people make a distinction between the two, with the Russell groups being the really competitive ones and the non-Russell Group ones being less competitive. And what I'm here to tell you today is that distinction, in a broad sense, is accurate, but not always so. There's lots of non-Russell Group universities nowadays which are really competitive and really high performing. So think of Lancaster University, for example. That's not a Russell Group university, but it's one of the most popular competitive universities in the UK. And at the same time, there's lots of variation between courses as well. So there's some courses where non-Russell Group universities outperform Russell Group universities in terms of the quality of the course and job prospects. So don't make a university choice based on that Russell Group versus non-Russell Group classification. Try and look beyond those labels of the universities individually in terms of how they perform for every single course, how good the university is and how it suits what you want to do, and those sort of things. Don't try and make it based on a crude distinction between Russell Group and non-Russell Group. The second one is about university league tables being a good guide to picking universities. So you may have seen this in the press, but every single year, the Guardian newspaper compiles a league table of all the universities in the United Kingdom and ranks them between 1 and 300 odd. And a lot of people see that as a good indicator of which universities are good and which universities are less good. And especially as an indicator of competitiveness as well, in terms of universities at the top are naturally more competitive, and the one in terms of getting into them, and the ones at the bottom less competitive. But again, it's far more complex than that. The league tables, the overall league tables, cover a whole different range of subjects. They cover a whole different range of factors around course quality, graduate employment prospects, welfare. So it's really important to drill just a little bit deeper in terms of making your choice. So one of the things you might want to do is, if you decide on your subject and you just want an initial guide in terms of what universities you should be looking at, rather than looking at sort of headline university league tables, there's lots of websites out there which offer subject-based university league tables. So rather than looking at the universities for all courses, just look at the league table for your particular subject, and maybe use that as a first step in terms of maybe checking out some of those individual universities. And I'm sure what you'll see from doing that is actually the ranking of the universities dramatically changes based on what subject that you want to study. So for instance, if you want to study English, the league table will look very different from if you want to study drama, for example. Universities have very different sort of departments for English and drama, and universities have different skill sets in terms of the staff who work there and their resources. So don't make a decision based on headline university league tables. Try and look at those subject-based league tables instead. In terms of actually reputations around individual universities, this goes back to the sort of distinction between Russell Group, non-Russell Group, Oxbridge, non-Oxbridge, and trying to look beyond some of those labels. Universities are really big brands globally. Some universities like Oxford and Cambridge are almost as well known as big brands like Adidas or a McDonald's, but that inevitably means that some universities have sort of garnered a reputation over the years based on a number of different things. So for instance, Oxford, Cambridge and the Russell Group universities are known for being quite posh historically, and some people think that they've had a preference towards privately educated students rather than students from the state sector. And what I'm here to sort of tell you today is that those distinctions no longer hold. The Oxbridge and Russell Group universities have become far more diverse over the past 10 years. All universities now recruit more state school students every single year than students from private schools, and increasingly the top universities are bringing more students from areas of the country where historically not many students have gone. So what I try and say here is, don't be put off by the brand image of a particular university, and don't listen to those myths around universities being posh and preferring one type of student over another. That all universities are now really welcoming of students from all backgrounds. You certainly won't be disadvantaged from going to a state school versus a private school. And if anything, the way the system's changing now, universities in their admission systems look more closely at the type of school you've gone to in the past and sort of view your academic performance in that context. So for example, if you go to a private school where everyone achieves straight nines at GCSEs and you've got straight nines as well, that might not be seen by a university as impressive as a student who goes to a state school who got straight nines and all their friends were getting straight fours instead. So universities are really keen to look at more ways to recruit students from areas of the country and schools where they haven't reached before. So if definitely don't be put off by any of those brand images around universities preferring people from certain backgrounds. It's certainly not true anymore. Universities are all very diverse. And this goes on to the next point as well about Oxbridge, which I think has one of the more powerful brand images and reputations around the country. And just in the same way that lots of people have associated those two universities with poshness in the past, there's still a reputation there that everyone who goes to those universities must be an absolute genius with straight nines at GCSE, going to get straight A stars at A level, probably got a really high IQ and a member of Mensa. And I can tell you that's absolutely false. Having gone to Oxbridge myself and having lots of friends there and being at the university, I can tell you that it's certainly true that not everyone there is a genius. Of course, you get some people who are incredibly intelligent, but lots of people are just normal students who are just really passionate about their course, and of course they're intelligent and academic, but you don't have to be a genius to go to those two universities. Thousands upon thousands of students go to Oxford and Cambridge University every single year. The vast majority of them don't have straight nines at GCSE or straight A stars at A level. People have good grades, but not always perfect grades. So don't think that you have to be a genius or every part of your application has to be absolutely perfect in order to target those two universities. If you've got a good academic record, you're really passionate about your subject and you want to study at a university where there's really good resource for that subject, certainly don't be put off applying to Oxford and Cambridge if you think those are institutions that you'd like to consider. And then the final bit is around, sometimes there's a myth that if you apply to one university, another university that you apply to at the same time, so of course on your UCAS application, you choose 5 universities to apply to, or up to 5. There's a myth that sometimes if you apply to one, another one will find out and they'll reject you because of it. So a standard way this myth plays out is, again, in reference to Oxbridge, some people think that if you apply to an Oxbridge university, so Oxford, Cambridge, your universities will disadvantage you as a result because they'll be worried that you won't go to their university because you want to go to an Oxbridge university. I can tell you that's absolutely false. But the way the UCAS system works is that universities don't have access to your application above and beyond your application to that university. So if you're applying to University of Leeds won't know which other universities that you've applied to as well. It's completely private data. So don't try and calculate which universities to apply to based on how other universities might look at other universities. The other universities don't know which universities you've applied to. So make sure you make the 5 choices which are best for you, rather than try and come up with some strategy around getting universities to pick you. So that's a little bit on sort of making the broad choice around a course and a university. So those are the 2 sort of fundamental bits at the start of your UCAS application. So of course, the next part of the UCAS application is inputting your grades. And then the final part is the personal statement. So where you write an essay, which is 4,000 characters long, tends to be 4 or 5 paragraphs where you sort of talk about why you want to study a particular academic course and what you've done previously to demonstrate that you might be a good person to study that course. And now that personal statement is an area of the application which is riddled with myths. Again, I think one of the reasons for that is the system is very opaque. Universities don't always talk about the way the personal statement system works in their application process. Universities have started talking a bit more about what makes a good personal statement, what makes a bad personal statement. You can find a little bit of that information online, but it isn't always clear exactly how it factors into the admissions process. So what I'll try and do now is sort of shine a little bit more of a light upon that, because once you understand how the personal statement is actually utilized, you might be able to better realize what information you want to put in the personal statement and what information you might not want to put in there. So the first myth is that admission officers don't actually read the personal statement. It's absolutely not true. No, pretty much every single university course in the country is oversubscribed. Some of them are oversubscribed massively. So some courses get 10 applicants for every single place that they can give out. So in those situations, especially where you've got lots of applicants who've got really good grades, the personal statement is actually the key data point for deciding which people get on the course and which people don't, especially at those universities which don't have a admissions test or an interview system. In those universities that are really heavily dependent on the personal statement as a way to evaluate which candidates they want to give offers to and which ones they don't. So the personal statement is certainly something that you should put a lot of time and thought into. It's really important, and it almost certainly will be read, especially if you've got the grades or good grades for a particular university. Your personal statement almost certainly will be read in quite a bit of detail by an admissions officer. So again, universities vary in terms of how they use it in-house, but the way it would usually work is an admissions officer would be able to see your application on their computer screen. They'd see automatically that you have the grades to sort of meet the requirements of their course. They'd see that on paper you look like a good applicant. And at that point, they'd sit down and have a proper read of your personal statement and maybe annotate it a little bit as well. And what they're trying to do is work out, above and beyond your academic record, are you a person who would be fit for that course? So in terms of actually analysing who is a good candidate for a course and who isn't, a lot of people like to talk about work experience on a personal statement because they think that is the key to impressing an admissions officer. And I think this is actually one of the biggest myths of the university application system. I think the key thing to bear in mind here is that the objective of the personal statement is to communicate to an admissions officer that you really care about a particular course and that you have previously in your experience engaged in activities which have really got you thinking in a certain type of way that would make you an interesting student to teach at that university. Now, of course, work experience can be a part of that. If you've done a work experience which is directly related to your course, and not only that, but in the personal statement, you've really spelled out and articulated how it helps you, think deeper about a particular part of your course, it helps develop a particular area of interest for you, then that can be useful. But if you just put in work experience there which isn't linked to your course, or you put in work experience and you don't explain how it develops your understanding, then that isn't helpful whatsoever. A typical thing that I see people do all the time is they think they have to go and do work experience at a big corporate employer, like in London, or they think they've got to do work experience with an MP, and that's one impressive bit of work experience looks like. Actually, that work experience for a personal statement isn't always massively impressive unless you can really clearly relate it back to what you're doing. And actually, sometimes the best work experiences are those which you might not always realise have the power that they do. Sometimes talking about a particular activity which is a little bit mundane, maybe refereeing a football match, for instance, can be a better bit of work experience if that person is then able to sort of talk about how refereeing a football match and seeing the way the ball was moved around the pitch and the physics of the movement of the ball inspired a particular interest in a particular part of physics around movement. That can actually be a more powerful thing to put in your personal statement than talking about an internship at NASA and not really explaining how it contributed towards your subject passion. So the key thing to remember here is always try and relate back what you talk about in your personal statement to your subject passion and to why you want to study the course. Never talk about anything in isolation. Even the most impressive sounding work experience is worth nothing unless you relate it to your course. So the third part is about talking about summer school. So this goes back again to the point around how will other universities feel about you talking about other universities on your personal statement. So I think that the key thing to bear in mind is universities know when you apply through UCAS that you're going to be applying to more than one university. They factor that into their decision making. Their models about which offers they give out are all based on the idea that lots of students who they give offers to or don't give offers to will go to different universities. So universities know that you're going to be applying to other universities as well. So in terms of how you actually then put together the personal statement, you should of course keep your personal statement broad in the sense that you shouldn't just reference one particular university. Actually, in your personal statement, you should just talk about your subject rather than the universities that you want to apply to. If you have done a summer school or an activity which was based at a particular university, feel free to talk about that. That will advantage you in your application. It won't disadvantage you, especially if you've been on sort of a widening participation or access summer school. Those are great things to talk about on a personal statement, because those are really good demonstrations of your passion for a particular subject and your engagement with it. And other universities will also be impressed that you've engaged with other universities' schemes. And what a lot of universities know as well is lots of schemes are locally based. So, if you're living in just outside Birmingham, for instance, it's natural that you would attend a summer school at the University of Birmingham rather than the University of Newcastle. So certainly don't be put off by mentioning a particular university-specific activity because you think that will put off the universities. It certainly won't do. The fourth part is about writing about volunteering experience, hobbies, and sporting successes. So again, this goes back to myth number 2 about what constitutes a really powerful personal statement to an admissions officer. So again, if you think back to that, what you're trying to communicate and convey is that you really care about your subject, you're passionate about it, and you've engaged in activities which help you get there. So the vast majority of your personal statement should be set up around that. And if you've done volunteering or hobbies or sports which contribute to you building up a narrative around your subject, then those are great things to write about. But again, don't talk about volunteering opportunities or hobbies or sporting successes in isolation. Always refer them back to how it contributed towards you building up an interest in your subject or the skills that will help you achieve in your subject going forward. So don't feel that you have to reference the Duke of Edinburgh Bronze Award that you did just for the sake of it. Only reference the award if you can find a way to tie it back to the skills that you'd need to do your particular academic subject, or if the award in some way contributed towards your subject passion. So yeah, don't try and create a personal statement which is just like a list of sporting successes and things that you've done. That's not particularly impressive, because you've got to remember, admissions officers are looking at hundreds and thousands of personal statements every week. They're used to seeing people talk about all sorts of different things they've done. Now, you doing a load of impressive things is probably not going to be that impressive to an admissions officer if you can't tie it to the subject. So make their life easy for them, tie it to the subject so they can really see clearly that you are someone who will be a great person to study that subject at their university. The final part is around an excellent personal statement will cancel out poor academic performance. So that sounds a little bit harsh. What I'm trying to convey here is a personal statement's really, really important, but you've got to make sure that you're applying to universities which your previous performance will give you a good chance of success. So even if you write the most incredible personal statement, you shouldn't be offended if you get rejected by a university which has a grade requirement far above what your teachers predict for your A-levels or what you've achieved at a GCSE. So a personal statement is really, really important, but it's an important thing in terms of getting you over the line for those universities which you can already access because of your previous academic performance. It's not going to suddenly transform your university application in any way. So again, the personal statement is really important, but make sure that you think really carefully about which universities to apply to as well. There's lots of really great websites out there on the internet which give you information about certain universities and courses and what the standard academic record is of students applying to those courses, and that might give you a little bit more of a sense of which courses are accessible, which courses aren't in terms of previous GCSE performance. So the last part of this is student finance, which is a big issue for a lot of students. And again, is one of these areas which a lot of myths have flown around. So people talk about things like student debt and it being an incredibly scary and anxious thing, which of course it can be for a lot of people. There's very little understanding amongst lots of people, parents and students, about how the system actually works. So I'm not going to bore you by talking about the technicalities of how the system works exactly, but I just want to dispel some of those key myths that might be putting you off going to university at the moment, but almost certainly shouldn't be factors that you think about when making your decision. So the first one is that if you go to university, you'll graduate with loads and loads of debt. So university is expensive in terms of, courses are, they cost just over £9,000 per year, and there's living costs as well. But you shouldn't think of that in terms of a debt, because the way it works is, you build up a load of, so you go to university, you've got 3 years of tuition fees, you've got the cost of your day-to-day living, but you don't have to pay that back immediately at any point. It almost acts as like an extra tax when you graduate. So if you go to university and you go into a high-paying job, you'll pay a couple of % of your salary every single month back to the government to pay off your student debt. And if you don't get a job straight away, then you don't have to pay anything back. So think about the cost of university as like an extra tax on you going forward, rather than a big pile of debt that you've got to pay off at some point. If you finish university and you can't get a job, you're not going to have debt collectors come around to your door or sending you letters. You won't hear anything from the government whatsoever. So don't be put off by the sort of headline prices of different courses. It acts like a tax. Calling it tuition fee debt isn't the best way to look at the system. So again, this relates to the next point, which is if you don't get a job after university, you'll go broke. No, not true at all. You actually only start paying back your student debt once you earn over a certain amount of money. So I can't remember what the exact figure is now, but it's roughly around £25,000 per year, and it keeps increasing over time in line with inflation. So by the time that you finish university, it'll probably be around £28,000. So unless you're earning more than that straight away, you actually won't be paying back anything in terms of your tuition fees. So don't be worried. The world's a scary place at the moment in terms of job opportunities, and I completely understand that. But that shouldn't be something that factors into your decision around university and then paying off your student tuition fee. You only do that if you get into a high-paying job. So the next is that most students pay back all their student loan. They're absolutely not true. Actually, the vast majority of students don't pay back their student loan. So there's actually only a really small minority of students who pay back all of their student loan. Most people pay back a little bit over the course of their life. So as I said before, they pay back a certain percentage of their salary every month to the government, but that usually doesn't cover the entire size of the loan. So actually, it's normal for most students not to pay back their student loan. Hopefully that might make you feel a little bit more comfortable about the system and the way it works for most people. Like, I can only talk about my own case. So I went to university, graduated 2 years ago. I still got, technically on paper, £50,000 of student debt, but in terms of how that works, I pay around 80 to £90 per month, and that just comes out of my salary as almost like an additional tax. So don't think that most people are magically paying off their student loan. Actually, the normal thing is not to pay it back over the long term, and that's the way the system is being constructed and the way it currently works. And the final one is around, if you're not from a rich family, you won't be able to afford university. So the thing I'd say here is the way the university finance system works is that you get a loan from the government for your day-to-day living costs. So it's called the maintenance loan. You can look it up online. And the amount of money that you get is based on two things. So one of it is based on how expensive is the city that you're going to live in compared to other places in the UK. So if you go to a London university, for instance, you'll get more money than if you're going to a university up north, because the cost of living in London is much higher. And the other thing it's based on is your family background as well. So if you don't come from a really affluent family, where your parents are earning hundreds of thousands of pounds, you'll actually get more money from the government, whilst those students who come from more affluent families with richer parents will get less money. So that the system is means tested, where the lower your household income, the more money that you'll get from the government to make up for that. The other thing that's worth mentioning as well is lots of universities have bursaries as well. So if you are a student from a household with lower amounts of income, you will be eligible for bursary. So I can talk about my own case. When I was at university at Oxford, I got a mean tested loan from the government, which was the maximum loan. So I think it was around £7,500 per year. But I also, on top of that, got a grant from a bursary from the university as well, of around £3,000 per year. So if you are a student whose parents can't afford to send the money during university, you will get a lot of financial support, both from the government and from universities, which offer very good bursary schemes. So hopefully that should dissuade people around the cost of get rid of some of those myths around the cost of living at university. Now, of course, lots of people do get jobs at university to earn a little bit more money, but in terms of the day-to-day things you need to get by and do your studies, those should be pretty much covered by your student loan and any bursaries that you get from the university. So that's the talk in terms of busting some of those key myths. I'm conscious that I've talked for quite a significant period of time. So I thought quite a nice thing to do might be to address any questions that have come up so far in terms of the talk. And then if you don't have any of those, I can maybe talk a little bit more specifically about the UCAS process, the way it works, and also maybe some experiences of students I've come across before in terms of applying to university. I thought this might be a nice point for that to invite some questions from people from all the content thus far.
Yeah, please do write in the chat bar if you have any questions. That was really interesting, and I think you covered such a broad gamut of all the questions that would be asked, and it was really easy to follow as well. Thanks so much. I just have a question. I sometimes meet students who are a bit nervous of travelling further afield than their homes, and that might not necessarily be financial. It might just not be. It might just be more of a fear. Do you have any advice on that? Because I personally, I've always thought it's quite nice to move away and get somewhere different. But do you have any advice on that, Joe?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of elements to that. So looking at the data that we can see in terms of where people go to university every year, we can see that students who come from more affluent backgrounds and schools where lots of people historically have gone to top universities, they tend to move far away from home than students from backgrounds more similar to mine when I was growing up, or state schools. I suppose there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, there's a financial element. Some people like to stay at home. So if you stay at home at university, you'll still get a loan from the government to cover some of your day-to-day living costs. It is less than you get if you went to university, but it still does make sense for some people. But I think the social side is a key thing to consider. And I understand this point because it's pretty crazy when you think about it. You're 17, 18-year-old, and you spend all of your life being protected by your parents, being protected by your school, and then suddenly at the age of 18, you're then released to the wide, crazy world, and you've got to go to a strange city that you've never been to before. And that's an incredibly crazy, anxiety-inducing experience. And what I'm trying to say is that's normal. That's how everyone feels, and that shouldn't be something that puts you off in terms of going to somewhere new. Now, everyone has a really tricky time when they first go to university because you meet lots of new people. You leave your friends from school behind a lot of the time, leave your family. It takes a little bit of time to acclimatise, but that's all part of the process. And actually, once you bed in after the first couple of weeks, it can be incredibly fun and liberating. Being to a new city, taking advantage of opportunities never seen before, making new friends. A lot of the time, a lot of my best friends now are people I've met at university. I can still keep in touch with a lot of my friends back home, but I've made lots of new friends too. It's incredibly exciting. So I encourage students to not be put off, certainly, by universities which are far away from home. So you should make a decision based on other things than how far away university is. Now, look at some of those things on courses and where is best to study. And if the best place to study you think is 300 miles away from home, that's fine. So yeah, certainly don't by default decide to go to a local university. Look at your full range of choices.
We have some questions. So students are asking about how they might get a contextualizer.
Yeah, so the way that tends to work is there's a lot of universities now where if you go on the sort of page for a particular course, you'll see two sets of grades. So you'll see the standard set of grades you need. It might be 3 A's, and then what you'll see below it is if you come from a widening participation background, that's usually the phrase that they use, which I know is a little bit weird, you get a lower grade offer of, say, AAB. Now, the difficulty is, and I imagine why the questions come up, is it's not always immediately it's not always immediately obvious whether you're a student who qualifies in that bracket or a student who doesn't. I certainly, I was someone who was qualify as a learning participation student, but I never realised when I was applying to university that that applied to me. Never even heard that language before. So universities use slightly different criteria in terms of how they measure that. It's not always clear beforehand. One of the things you can do is most universities do publish it on their website in terms of who's a learning participation student and who isn't. So if there's a particular university you're interested in who's talking about contextualized offer, if you type in that university's name on Google and learning participation, you should be able to see some of the criteria. And hopefully you might be able to use that to work out whether you qualify for a contextualized offer or not. But it's not a completely transparent process, to be honest, which I know is incredibly frustrating, but you might have to look a little bit deeper in each university to see if you qualify for a contextualized offer or not.
Okay. And would studying London help me get a higher paid job?
Yeah, so I think, again, this is an important thing when it comes back to the league tables. So if you think about a subject like economics, for example, and look at the league tables for economics, so you'll see, obviously, Oxford and Cambridge, for example, have got really good economics departments historically, really successful, got lots of interesting professors. But people who go to study economics in London-based universities have a big advantage over people who go to study at Oxbridge, because they're right on the doorstep of the city where a lot of the high-paying economics-orientated jobs are. So I think the location of where you go to university is important. If you go to university in London, you might be able to access some of the jobs in the London area a bit easier than if you go to a university elsewhere, especially when it comes to applying to graduate jobs. When you're 21 at the end of university, it's really important that you've got work experience nowadays to be able to do that. So living in London where there's lots of work experience opportunities can be a big advantage. But I suppose the only thing to bear in mind again is you've got to think what really motivates you. Why do you want a higher paid job? Now, of course, jobs in London are higher paid, but also the cost of living here is very high as well. And actually, a job which pays a little bit less outside London might be a better fit if it's something that you want to do. So again, they think London can help you get a higher paid job, but it's you should think, why are you doing it in the first place? And sort of think about your why, and that should give you a sense of directedness about whether a London university is right for you or not.
And can you recommend any subject-based league table websites? You're talking about, how would they source those league tables, subject-based league tables?
Yeah, so I think The Guardian, I'm not sure if it's up for this year yet, but The Guardian also break down by subject as well as universities as well. So if you just type in university subject league tables into Google, you should find it. Or if you type in Guardian University Guide, the Times do one as well, Times University Guide. So, for example, just for doing a quick Google now, search now, type in Guardian University Guide, you'll see a list of subjects with their league tables. So I can click straight on here onto one for accounting and finance and agriculture and forestry. So it's really easy to access those. So yeah, just do a quick Google search and you should be able to find it pretty much straight away.
Any more questions from anybody? They were very good questions. We've actually done very well, and we're nearly at our hour anyway. But it would be good, Joe, if you could just tell everybody a little bit more about zero gravity, because obviously there are a lot of students on here that would be interested to hear about what you guys do and how you could possibly help them.
Sure. So I hope people have enjoyed and benefited from the talk today. And I suppose the big opportunity I want to tell you is there's more young people like me who've been through the process ourselves who'd really like to help students like you navigate what we all know is a really complicated, difficult and stressful process. So this isn't a process that you should have to do alone. There's lots of teachers at school who will try and help you and stuff, but inevitably they're trying to look after 300 students at the same time. It's very difficult. And actually having an individual student who's been through the same process themselves a couple of years ago could be really helpful. So if that's the sort of thing which you'd find helpful, then I run an organisation called Zero Gravity. We're a digital mentoring app where you can connect with a current undergraduate studying at a top university who will then mentor you into that university. So for instance, if you think that you really want to study chemistry at University of Leeds, you can sign up for our app and you can connect straight away with a current undergraduate studying chemistry at Leeds, and then they'll connect with you all through our app in one-to-one video sessions, talk you through the admissions process, how it works, help you with a personal statement, anything else, help you bridge the gap between school and university, and it's completely digital and completely free. So that's the sort of thing that you'd be interested and benefit from. It only takes 60 seconds to sign up. Either type in Zero Gravity on Google, or you can go straight to www.zerogravity.co.uk.
Fantastic. And then after university, if you need help getting work experience, talk to the Talent app as well. So we're all here to help people get on and get ahead, which is fab. Joe, do you have any last points you want to raise? It's a bit funny with the webinar because no one else can speak to us. It's just us. It's not like a Zoom chat. But do you have any
The last point is, it's a crazy world that we're living with at the moment. Education's been incredibly disrupted, universities, exams. It's really, really crazy. So it's normal at the moment to feel incredibly stressed and anxious about your future. A lot of people are feeling like that at the moment. And all I'm trying to say is you're not alone. Everyone appreciates it's a really difficult period of your life that you're entering into. And just take some time to sit back and think about what you really want to get out of this and really want to achieve. Now, don't rush into decisions. Don't feel pressured by what other people are doing. Really try and identify why you want to go to university and study a particular course, because that's what's going to make you really happy going forward. So it's really easy to get carried away when life's so chaotic, but try and take a good hour on some day this week to really think about what you want to achieve and what sort of person you want to be in 5 or 10 years time.
That's really great advice, and thank you very much for spending this hour helping us and talking to us. And I know a lot of people have been on this course, on this Zoom, so a lot of people will be listening later, and I really appreciate it. Guys from Caulfield said thanks, Joe, and I know, and thank you from on behalf of the Talent App as well. It's really cool. Cheers everybody, and I'm going to turn it off now, but have a nice rest of the day. Thanks, Joe. Cheers.
Cheers guys, see you later.